Your four favorites are The Holy Mountain, 2001: A Space Odyssey, There Will Be Blood, and Titane. My top choice for you is Eraserhead. Like The Holy Mountain, it's one of the most noteworthy surrealist films of the 1970s. Like 2001, it was a groundbreaking, highly influential film that inspired a lot of filmmakers, and it relies more on visuals than dialogue. It's full of symbolism, and if I were to make a list of films with the best sound design, they'd both be at the top. Like There Will Be Blood, the protagonist struggles with the concept of fatherhood, and like Titane, it's a body horror film that explores the theme of parenthood. My other top choice for you is A Clockwork Orange. Like The Holy Mountain, it was released in the early 70s and has a similar visual aesthetic with very bold set designs, and both films critique forms of societal control. Like 2001, it was directed by Stanley Kubrick, and it even includes a direct reference to 2001. Like There Will Be Blood, the protagonist is a violent anti-hero who could be considered a sociopath, and like Titane, the violent protagonist undergoes some sort of transformation. Speaking of films with iconic characters that are violent sociopaths or psychopaths, there were a few films I was surprised you didn't have marked as watched, so I also want to recommend American Psycho, No Country for Old Men, and Apocalypse Now. Mishima, A Life in Four Chapters has a bold visual style and feels like a metaphysical journey like The Holy Mountain. The story consists of different chapters that kind of reminds me of 2001. Like There Will Be Blood, it explores masculinity and obsession, and like Titane, it delves into themes pertaining to identity, violence, destruction, and transformation. On the Silver Globe is a surrealist film with religious themes like The Holy Mountain, but it's also a sci-fi film involving astronauts and space travel like 2001. I think The Hourglass Sanatorium has a similar vibe to The Holy Mountain, and they're both surrealist films, but I also think you'd like this one because it has a lot to do with a father-son relationship like There Will Be Blood and Titane. Altered States depicts metaphysical themes in a sort of psychedelic, surreal way like The Holy Mountain. It's a sci-fi film that examines the concept of human evolution like 2001. Like There Will Be Blood, it depicts a man who's driven by obsession and ambition. And like Titane, it's a body horror film about transformation. 12 Monkeys has a disorienting vibe like The Holy Mountain. It's science fiction like 2001. Like There Will Be Blood, there's a feeling of madness and obsession. And like Titane, we see how something that occurs during childhood affects the protagonist later in life. Oldboy explores some similar themes to your favorites, including identity and obsession, and it's an intense character-driven story like There Will Be Blood with some extreme violence and emotional trauma like Titane. I think you should check out Magnolia. Not only is it from the director of There Will Be Blood, but it also includes a reference to 2001: A Space Odyssey, and there's at least one biblical reference like The Holy Mountain. Enter the Void is a surreal, psychedelic, metaphysical journey like The Holy Mountain. The Treasure of the Sierra Madre was an influence on There Will Be Blood, and Paul Thomas Anderson sent a copy of the film to Daniel Day-Lewis when he was trying to figure out the voice for his character. There's something about your favorites that makes me think you'd enjoy Amadeus. Maybe it's because there's this feeling of obsession, ambition, and a bit of rivalry, like There Will Be Blood. Possessor is a science fiction body horror film about identity and the human body, like Titane. A couple movies that depict metal or car-related fetishes that I think you might like since you like Titane are Crash and Tetsuo the Iron Man. I was trying to avoid recommending too many films from the same directors as your favorites, but I reread your review for Titane and decided I really think you'd enjoy Raw. It's got the body horror of Titane, but also has a lot to say about identity, femininity, and family. You also mentioned trauma in your Titane review, which makes me want to recommend another film from one of the directors of your four favorites, Santa Sangre, which is a surreal psychological horror film that also has a lot to say about childhood trauma. Under the Skin is a sci-fi film that relies more on visuals than dialogue like 2001. Like The Holy Mountain, it follows a character going on a sort of surreal and abstract journey. Like Titane, it covers themes related to the body, gender, identity, and transformation. And There Will Be Blood, Under the Skin. I hate myself.